Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Running to Win. My name is Kim White. I want to thank you again so much today for joining us. I'm excited. If you've been tuning in the last few weeks, we have been talking about the story of Korah in the Bible and how that some mistakes maybe that he made that we as believers in our running our race can kind of look at and check ourselves and see how we're doing there. But before I get into today's lesson, I want to just talk to you a little bit about the platform that I'm on and just kind of introduce Kingdom First TV a little bit. Kingdom First TV is a platform out of Love and Unity Movement, which is based in California. And the visionary for that is Apostle Eddie My Estes. It has been a pleasure and an honor to be part of this and be one of the broadcasters on this platform that is reaching around the world and available many, many ways to be able to watch or listen. We are excited about what God is doing through this. Just in the last month or so, we had over 500,000 views, and we have thousands that are now following this ministry. The reason I believe it's so important is I believe that there are just so many people that are still in this world today that need to hear about Jesus. They need to hear about this God that we serve. They need to hear that there's a better way. So it is an honor to be able to be part of that all. Now, listen, you might be listening today and you might be somebody who does broadcast. You might be thinking, I have something that I would like to do, and you may have experience in that area. So I would invite you to check out love-unity.org. On that website, you can find out what Love and Unity Movement is all about. And I think that you'll just be so pleasantly surprised at the things that you see on there. This is a growing ministry that's reaching all over the world. If you click actually on this screen, you'll see a little Kingdom First TV icon there. If you click on that, that'll take you to Kingdom First TV and give you an overview of what's happening there. We have many great broadcasters that are on there that are telling about Jesus and telling about the kingdom. And that's God's command. Jesus said, go into all the world and preach the kingdom. And that's what we're doing. So I'm thankful for this opportunity. Now, the last 2 weeks, I'll just do a quick overview here of what we've been talking about. The last couple of weeks, we've been telling the story of Korah in the Bible. And Korah is a story of somebody who was bound for greatness, who had great privilege, who had an honorable position with the Israelites as they were traveling to the promised land. He was set up for success, but unfortunately, there were areas of his life that crept in. There were things that took away his joy and his love for what he was doing, and caused him to begin to rise up in a negative way, and basically destroyed his future, destroyed his life, as a matter of fact. And so we've been talking about that. We've been sharing that story. And really, even as I've studied this, I've seen so many areas that we have to be so careful in as believers, as Christians, as people who have a calling on their lives. And everybody is called to something. You might not be somebody who sits behind a camera. You might not be somebody who stands behind the pulpit, but every born again believer has something that God has chosen them to do. And in God's eyes, nothing is more significant than the other. So if God has called you to be maybe in a position that serves somebody else who is on a platform, that's an honor. And I think that the thing is that Korah stopped looking at what he got to do as an honor, but he began to look at it as a lesser thing. So today, that being said, I felt there were several areas as I shared the story of Korah that are so relevant in this day and age, because we're living in a different world now. We're living in a world where there seems to be so much dissension, there's so much contention, there's so much striving, there's so much trying to one up each other, and just confusion and division and discord and everything. And unfortunately, it's not just in the secular realm, it's not just in the world, but has crept in many places into the body of Christ. So I believe that as believers, myself included, as I've been doing these studies, I've had to look at these and see areas where Kim White needs to address. Kim White needs to go back and look at this. Kim White needs to make sure that she's doing okay. And Kim White needs to ask the Lord to help her in some areas. So maybe as you listen, if you want to go back and listen to the last a couple of episodes, and maybe as you continue to listen to the series, you're going to see some areas that might help you as well. One of the things that we need to know about Korah is that his fall, his destruction did not happen overnight. We know the story in the Bible, and it kind of starts like from an area. It seems like everything happened in a few days when you read that scripture section in the Bible. It seems like it was just like a short little thing, but things start inside of us long before they are expressed outside of us. And that is exactly what happened to Korah. I'm saying that there are things that begin to kind of grow inside of us, a seed of something, and it can be over the least little thing. It can be by feeling that somebody has encroached on our position, or somebody, is trying to do what we're called to do, or it could be that somebody is better. It could even be looking at somebody as being better at something, and getting in our heart, animosity or whatever, or whatever. But we're going to talk about a few things. You see, I believe that really the source of everything that we deal with comes from an area called pride. And that pride does not happen overnight. As I said, there's a progression. There's a progression that happens, and there's some things in our lives that need to be corrected. And the sad part is that there are so many who don't have anybody in their life that corrects them. Now, let me tell you about Korah. He should have had people in his life that corrected him the first time that he opened his mouth and began to speak against the leader. As soon as he began to say anything derogatory about Moses, there should have been somebody that went, you don't do that. This is what could happen when you start to do that. There should have been somebody that knew more than him, that was in leadership over him, that came to him and said, you need to stop this. This is a result. This is where you're headed. If you don't arrest this, this will stop you from finishing what God has for you to do. This will stop you from, as pertaining to this particular program, it'll stop you from completing your race. So who was correcting Korah? Well, we know for sure that the people closest to him weren't. And the reason we know that is because, as I discussed a couple of weeks ago, the Bible says that they were murmuring, that particular tribe that he was in, the Kohathites, they were murmuring. There was dissension in there. They were not happy with the fact that the priest got more recognition. There was, why do we have to do this? A brief overview, I will tell you, the Kohathites carried the emblems and the articles that were in the tabernacle, and they couldn't touch them. They were carried on their shoulders, and they thought that their job was much harder, and they wanted somebody else's position. So the very people that should have been correcting him were actually the people that he was learning this dissension from. He was learning this murmuring from. Nobody stepped up to say, don't do that. I was thinking of how this pertains to running a race. And, in running, there are things that get corrected in training. You see, Korah was in training. Korah was rising up in his tribe, in his particular clan. He was destined for great things, and there were areas in his life that were never corrected. There are areas in our life that we will have to watch. And that's why it's so important to have somebody over us that can see the things that we can't see. There are areas, for example, if we since this program is called Running to Win, let's just talk about running the race for a minute, okay? Let's talk about it in the area of as being an actual runner. Say, just pretend, because I'm not, but just pretend that I'm an Olympic runner. Well, I didn't start out at the Olympics. There was a place way back when, probably in elementary school or junior high or something, that somebody recognized in me as a runner. That sounds funny even saying that, because trust me, I don't run, but there was something in that somebody recognized this person has potential in this particular area. So now a runner can be very, very, very fast, but there's so many things that if you don't learn as a runner, you will never win. There are areas that you have to watch. There are areas that you have to pay attention to. In runners, there are things that they have to correct. They have to correct sometimes even the pace that they take. They have to correct their mindset. They have to learn to stop looking at what's going on around them with the other runners and keeping their eye on the finish line. They have to learn how to dress, what to wear that allows them the maximum, the minimum resistance and the maximum speed. They have to practice, they have to train. It's not like, oh, I can run, and now I'm in the Olympics, as I mentioned a minute ago. That's a steady thing. To be able to do that, you don't get trained by somebody that's a wrestler or somebody that's shoots guns or does targets or things like that. You learn from somebody who's ran. Even an Olympian gymnast, they don't learn from somebody that knows how to do a couple of somersaults. They learned from somebody who had already been where they were going. So they had that. So it's so important who that person is that is training us, because they're going to teach us how to do it right, or they're going to teach us how to do it wrong. And unfortunately, in Korah's situation, he was being trained to grumble and to murmur, and instead of being trained by those around him, that you should be excited, you should be blessed, you should understand the awesome thing that you have. So in that training, there are things that we learn to do, and there are things that we learn not to do. As I studied this account of Korah, I realized that there were warning signs that I saw in Korah's life that led to his destruction. And so many of these warning signs are relevant in our world today. There are so many areas when it comes to this, as I review the whole account of Korah, there are so many areas in all of our individual lives that I can see where we need to be careful, where we need to look at, where we need to take heed. Take heed. We can watch other people make mistakes, but we have to look inside ourselves and take heed. What can I learn? What can I learn? And as I said, there's many areas, but I feel that I want to just narrow it down to 4 areas over the next 2, 3, 4 programs as we round out towards the end of this particular series. I want to go into those areas that I believe that believers that are running this race battle with the most. And it's not a physical race that we're running, it's a spiritual race that we're running. And the biggest thing that we have to overcome in that situation is we have to overcome our mind. We have to overcome the flesh. And we're going to discuss some areas. So today, the first one that I want to discuss is pride. Now, some of you might want to shut this program off right now and say, I have heard everything about pride. I know everything about pride. But I want to talk about several areas that were relevant to Korah. And I believe that all of those areas that I'm going to talk about that were relevant to Korah, they stem from one area, and that is pride. In an article by Jessica L. Tracy, and I'm going to read a little bit here if you see me looking down, and Richard W. Robbins, speaking about human pride, the following comments were made. Now, many of you have heard of Charles Darwin, who was a noted unbeliever. He was an atheist and believed that, taught that man came from monkeys and all this kind of stuff. But he said something about pride. Um, and while I don't endorse or condone what he believed or anything else, there was this one little thing that he said about pride that really stuck out to me. Of all of the complex emotions, pride, perhaps, is the most plainly expressed. A proud person exhibits a sense of superiority over others by holding their head and their body erect and making themselves appear as large as possible. Pride meets a central criterion for all human emotions. Pride evolved to convey success and thereby promote status and dominance. So you see, as this whole teaching is called the I in pride, what we're seeing here, even from somebody named Charles Darwin, it is actually bringing ourselves up to look bigger than what we really are. It's a puffing of ourselves up. We want to make ourselves as big and as visible as possible. We want to show our status and we want to show our dominance when we're dealing and we're operating in pride. And the problem with that is we in fact make ourselves our own kind of God, God, small g. And God says he will not have any other gods. There can be no other gods before him. Sometimes we talk about a lot of different gods. We think of, all the gods and stuff that have been talked about in the Greek theology and all those things over the year and everything. But you know what? Really, when we look at it, mankind has often become their own God. The Hebrew term for pride is called gaon, spelled Gaon. It is interpreted as arrogance, as a cynical insensitivity to others, and a presumption of self-importance. It is a shifting of confidence away from God and towards oneself. And that is exactly what happened in the story of Korah. He began to not even think about what God's plan was for him and of the opportunity that he had, but he began to look at himself as important. When he began to look at himself as important, he no longer had any respect for authority. He had no respect for leadership. He tried to put those that God had put over him on the same level as him. It was an insensitivity towards honoring those that were over him. We remember how that even the honor of being used to carry the emblems of a tabernacle were no longer seen for the honor that it was, because pride had entered into Korah's heart and he wanted what somebody else was doing. I want to talk about pride in some various areas because I believe now this is Kim White speaking. You may have a different opinion, and that's fine. But I believe that coveting, is the source of pride is covetousness. I believe that pride is always comes from that moment when we begin to look at something else other than God. When pride enters into our heart, we can begin to be like Korah and believe that we could do a better job. We could believe that we are better skilled, or we can believe we should have that position. We begin to want something that belongs to somebody else to be ours. Covet means to yearn for something that belongs to someone else, but it's not only to yearn for it, it's to be consumed with it. It's to crave that and to have your heart set on it. See, I can have my heart set on finishing my race, but when I begin to look at somebody else and I begin to think, oh, I like what they have better. How come they got that and I got this, and I really want that. I can totally destroy my opportunities and my race and not even see the value of what I'm doing because I'm so caught up in wanting what somebody else has. It's more than just, oh, I wish I could do that too. Have you ever been in that situation where you've seen something that somebody does? Different times people will come up and they will say, Kim, I wish I could play the piano. Well, that's my calling. That's a gift that God gave me the ability to do because I'm called as a worshiper. Or they could, but at the same point, sometimes I will hear people preach and stuff like that. I'm thinking of a couple of the different hosts that are actually on this platform, and when they teach and when they preach, and I listen to them, sometimes I'll say, man, oh, I'd love to be able to teach like that, be able to preach like that. But it's not, I'm not jealous of what they do. It's because I see it gives me an incentive to do better in what I'm called to do. But Korah's covetousness did not give him incentive to be better in what he was called to do. It took his eyes off of what he was created to do and put his eyes on somebody else's. It's a feeling that you deserve that more than the other person. So, see, when we begin to feel that we deserve something better than another person, then we begin to feel like they don't deserve what God's given them. And really, it can really begin to cause you to dislike and to hate somebody. And Korah hated Moses. Korah hated Aaron. He hated Aaron's son. He hated every person that stood between him and what he coveted. The 10th commandment in Deuteronomy 5:21 instructed the children of Israel, thou shalt not covet. Don't yearn to be consumed with desire or crave something that is not yours. That's what that commandment was saying. Don't set your eyes on what belongs to somebody else. So after covetousness, I believe that we can look at comparison, because what happens is once you begin to covet something that somebody else is doing, you begin to start to compare your skills. Well, I could do that better, and really it's not so much that we think so loftily of ourselves as that we begin to downplay their skills. We begin to find their mistakes. We begin to look, for something, for some crack, for some little thing in what we once respected and loved and revered and honored. We suddenly start looking for the little things that would simply make them less, because we now have to compare ourselves. Korah began to covet the positions of Aaron his son. Because he coveted that position, comparison entered in. He began to convince himself in every way that he was more deserving and he was more capable of that position. There's an interesting quote by Theodore Roosevelt, who once said, comparison is the thief of all joy. Nothing will make you more miserable than when you begin to lose joy over what God has called you to do, and you begin to want what somebody else is doing. Suddenly, all the luster of what God has called you to do, all the excitement, everything kind of becomes like a grind. It just becomes an area of like, but I really want that. It's almost like, you go to the store to get a certain kind of ice cream and you're just thinking about the ice cream all day. You get there and there's none in that flavor. Well, you could have another ice cream. You could still do another ice cream or whatever, but it's not going to be the same because you really wanted that. Okay, well, maybe that's kind of a small comparison, really not as relevant as what we're talking about today, but you kind of get my thing. Once you get your eyes set on something else, your heart set on something else, your mind set on something else, nothing else seems quite as good. And that's not a good thing when we're looking at somebody else and we're wanting what God has called them to do instead of what we are called to do. 2 Corinthians 10:12 in the Passion Translation, Paul, I'll paraphrase a little bit, Paul called people who compare themselves delusional. Well, we know that Paul did not hold back words when he was telling people, when he was correcting. He did not hold back words. He said they rate themselves by comparing themselves to one another, and they make up. Then He said they make up their own rules and standards to measure themselves by, and they rate themselves highly. You see, what happens when we start to want to lift ourselves up to be better than the person that we feel we deserve their position, or that we're competing with, or we're coveting, or whatever, we start to change the standard of those rules. There were certain criteria to be a priest, but Korah had wanted to lower that criteria of that calling to priesthood so that he qualified for it. So we see in that situation right there how that comparing yourself, you can start to think that you're more capable than what you are. You can begin to look at the person that you're comparing yourself to. You start to find the things, right? And that is a slippery slope right there. Korah began to rate himself as higher than the leadership, and then he began to make his own rules. He could do a better job. He was more this, he was more that. He began to downplay the position of the others, and eventually stood before Moses saying, "You're no better than I am." Saying to the very person who God had used to part the water, who God had used to hold back the enemy, who God had used to take them to the promised land, he began to say, "You're no better than me." Well, we're going to go on in the next episode, and we're going to talk about a little bit more of pride today, and a couple of other areas that I think you'll find interesting. Listen, thank you so much. And I ask you right now, if you're listening to this broadcast and anything that I'm talking about is kind of maybe just touching your heart a little bit, it's kind of making you think, I have felt that way before. Maybe you're listening today and you're on that road right there where you're feeling like you deserve something else. I don't believe this teaching is in vain, this series on Korah. I believe it's important because, as I've said before, just as much as we need to know all the things to do to win our race, we need to understand the areas that could be kind of gnawing at us, that could stop us from running. So join me again next week, and we're going to talk more about these areas that pride can bring up in our lives and everything. And we're going to deal with those, and we're going to see how God can take us out of that mindset and bring us forward in our race. Amen. Thank you so much for listening today. We will be back with you next week. God bless you.
Thank you for watching Kingdom First TV, your station for kingdom